Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. We have two sets of slides to get through today. Inshallah, I'm hoping that we'll get through both sets. We're probably going to go for about an hour, inshallah. Let me share screens with you for the first set of slides. Okay. All right. Like I mentioned last month, we're going through a book called Al-Munir fi Ahkam al-Tajweed. And this book is a textbook that is covered in order to get an ijaza in Tajweed or Hifz in Jordan through the organization of Hufaz in Jordan. So it's a very detailed book and it's written, mashallah, by 9 scholars. So it's very, it has a lot of, a variety of opinions, and it's very comprehensive. And because it's written by so many scholars and they're checking each other's work, there are very few or no mistakes at all. Okay. So part 1, we will be talking about the Istiadha, the definition of the Istiadha. What is the Istiadha? So Istiadha is basically saying A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. It is also called Ta'awudh, I think. The possible wordings for the Istiadha, the ruling of the Istiadha, reciting it audibly or silently, and then options for joining or stopping. All right, so the definition. And this is very common in Tajweed, that words have a certain meaning linguistically, but in Tajweed they will mean something else. So oftentimes when we learn a new term in Tajweed, we're told the linguistic meaning of it as well as its definition in Tajweed. So linguistically, it is the masdar, or for the verb isti'adh, and isti'adha literally means to seek protection or refuge. So in this case, when we say a'udhu billah, we're seeking refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in Tajweed, it means to seek refuge in Allah from the accursed shaitan, and it indicates the intention of the reciter to begin recitation, and it is a dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect us from shaitan. Okay, possible wordings. So the most common way that we say it is A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. However, in Surah An-Naml, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَإِذَا قَرَأْتَ الْقُرْآنَ فَاسْتَعِذْ بِاللَّهِ مِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ الرَّجِيمِ. So this is a wording here. However, there is another possible wording, and we do see this in some of the tafsirs and also some of the rawis or the imams of the qira'at, Imam Nafi', Imam Ibn Amir, that they also recite this wording. And this is mentioned in a tafsir of ayah 36 of Surah Al-Fussilat. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, inna Allaha huwa as-sami'ul alim. But the one that we recite most often, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, is the preferred wording. Okay? But in case you do hear this, you should know that this is another wording of the Isti'adha. And the second wording, where we add in Allah huwa as-sami'ul alim, was narrated by Umar ibn al-Khattab, and there are 3 qaris that actually prefer this version over the others. Okay. And there is no, and regardless of which one you choose, there's no, how do I say it? Although one is preferred, there isn't an issue if you choose to read the second wording. Okay, the ruling concerning the Isti'adha. So the scholars agree that the Isti'adha is not a part of the Quran, and we're going to do the same thing with the Basmala as well. And why does it matter whether this phrase is part of the Quran or not? And one of the reasons why it matters is because sometimes we're in a state of ritual purity where we're not allowed to recite the Quran. So then the question becomes, well, can we recite this phrase? Let's say we want to seek protection. Can we say, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, or is it considered a part of the Quran? So the Isti'adha is not considered a part of the Quran. Then the next question is, well, okay, there are 2 ruling, like, do I have to read it, right? Because the ayah says, فَإِذَا قَرَأْتَ الْقُرْآنَ فَاسْتَعِذْ بِاللَّهِ. So do I have to do it? Is it obligatory for me to do it? So the scholars, there's a difference of opinion there. Some scholars say that it is mustahab, that it's highly recommended to recite it before you begin your recitation, and others say that it is wajib. So it has this, like, they're giving it a stronger ruling. Both opinions have very detailed dalils, but if somebody skips it and decides not to read it and decides to begin directly with the basmala, there is no sin on them or anything like that. However, it is obviously best to read it. Then the next question is, should it be read audibly or silently? This is something I know I used to be really confused about. Basically, the simple rule, and we'll go into more details, is if you're reading out loud, say the Ista'adha out loud. If you're reading silently, say the Ista'adha silently. But there are some other situations that also come up. So, for example, when you're reading in a class, so there's multiple ways of doing a khatam, for example, in a group setting. One is that each person is doing a khatam of their own, and the teacher listens to each student at a time, and each student reads from their particular place. The other way of making a khatam is that you're making a khatam as a group. And this happens, and then all the students are given ijazah in the whole Quran, and the ijazah specifies that they finish the Quran by listening and reading. So one student will recite, and wherever that student stops, the next one begins. And it is considered as if one person is reciting. This is considered a single recitation. Okay, so in that case, the first person will say "A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem" out loud, and it will count for everybody else. Okay, so if you are that one person, if you're the first person, then you should read it out loud so that it counts for everybody else. Okay. Also, when you're reading out loud, let's say at a gathering or even by yourself, if you would like to, then you can read the Istiadha out loud. Okay. One of the benefits of reading the Istiadha out loud, for example, if you are going to be reciting aloud, is, let's say you're in a space where there's multiple people, family, etc., and you're going to begin reciting, and if you begin with Isti'adha, then people know, okay, now the Quran is going to be recited, and then they can observe the proper adab of that. Now, when should it be recited to oneself? So, of course, if you're not reading out loud, you can, read it to yourself. If no one is listening to the recitation, so nobody really is there, nobody needs to know that you're beginning your recitation. And then this point is very important. So, as I mentioned, when we're reading in a group, in a class, so let's say the Sheikh says, okay, there's, 5 of you, so each person is going to read 2 pages each. So let's say 4 people are there and the 5th person is late. When the 5th person walks in, the Isti'adha that was recited in the beginning of class by person number 1 does not apply to them because they weren't there, they didn't hear it. So now they have to say the Isti'adha when it is their turn, but they do not say it out loud because everyone else has already recited the Isti'adha. Okay. Then the next thing is when one is praying. So this is an important point. Is even though there are rules that apply when we recite the Quran, the tajweed rules that apply. Do I read the Basmala? Do I read the Isti'adha? Do I read it out loud? Do I read it silently? These apply when you are reciting the Quran outside of prayer. When you are reciting the Quran within prayer, then you should follow the rulings of your madhab. And, just like you'll notice in these slides, I'm giving you multiple opinions. Like, okay, some say it's wajib, some say it's mustahab. And that is because there's a difference of opinion amongst schools of thought. So it is important that when you pray that you know what the opinions of your school of thought are regarding the Isti'adha. Or not the Isti'adha, because Isti'adha will be read silently, even in prayer, but the Basmala, for example, and then you follow the rulings of your madhab when you pray. not necessarily the rules of tajweed in terms of the Istiadha and the Basmala. Of course, the other rules of tajweed do apply. Okay, any questions so far? We covered a few things. So basically, basically the answers to the questions, do I have to read it? And then when do I read it? And do I read it aloud or silently? Any questions about any of those things so far? You can type them in if you prefer.
No, Ustad, alhamdulillah.
Okay, now renewing the Istiadha. When I say reading to oneself, it means reading it silently. And when you are reading to yourself, just by yourself alone, it means a low voice. So I'm not sure what the opinion is in the other madhahib, but in the Hanafi madhab, reading is considered the movement of the tongue. So if your tongue is not moving in order to form the letters, even if there is no sound, then that is, if the tongue is moving, even if there is no sound, it is considered recitation. If the tongue is not moving and you're simply reading in your mind, that is not considered recitation. Okay, so renewing the Istiadha. Let's say you're reciting the Quran and you sneeze or you yawn or you cough. You do not need to renew the Istiadha. Also, sometimes we do talk in between, like especially if it's a class. And then the question is, well, now do I have to say the Istiadha again? So let's say a student is reciting and there is a word and she asks the teacher, what does this word mean? And the teacher goes into detail about what it means and what it means in the context of that ayah, what is its grammatical form, basically everything that is related to understanding that ayah and understanding the Quran. So now when the student begins to read again, he or she does not have to say the Istiadha again or the Basmala again, they simply continue reciting. However, sometimes, we do have situations where someone's reciting and like, let's say one student finishes a page and then, remembers something else, right? And says to the teacher, oh, I forgot to tell you, I won't be in class next week. Or, I forgot to tell you that, I need you to make dua for this, this, and this, or something, anything that's unrelated to the Quran. In that case, then the next person has to read the Istiadha again, because it's kind of like the Istiadha has been, I guess you could say, broken, right? And a funny little thing for that is that I used to teach a group of young ladies, and mashallah, they were very talkative. And so one of the challenges I would keep for them is that we have to read with one Istiadha, right? And that was the goal for them, is that that they shouldn't talk about anything in the middle of the recitation that would make us say Istiadha again. So that's just to help you to understand how that rule works. And the other thing is, even if you stop to say salam, sometimes people forget that even responding to a salam is something that requires you to say the Istiadha again. Also, it is bad adab that if you enter into a classroom when people are reciting the Quran, to say salam out loud and to expect them to respond to your salam. You should simply go and not disturb the recitation and join them if you want to join them, or if it's a musalla, pray if you need to pray. You can maybe motion to them with your head or your hand that you're saying salam to them, but to disturb them by saying salam and to expect them to say salam back, then they will have to say the Istiadha again. Okay, so that's just a point of adab. Okay. All right, so now we are going to basically see how we recite the Isti'adha with the Basmala and the first ayah of the surah. So let's say we are beginning recitation of Surah An-Nas. Okay. Now you are the first person reciting, so you have to say A'udhu Billahi Minash Shaitanir Rajeem. You have to say Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim because it is the beginning of the surah. So and then you have the first ayah of the surah. So now we have 4 different options. All 4 of them are correct. The first one is that you stop at the end of all 3 of these parts. So you would say A'udhu Billahi Minash Shaitanir Rajeem. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Qul A'udhu Bi Rabbin Nas. Okay, that's option number 1. Option number 2 is to join all 3 of them. So you can say أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل أعوذ برب الناس. The other is that you stop at the Isti'adha and you join the Basmala with the first ayah of the next surah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل أعوذ برب الناس. And the 4th option is joining the Isti'adha with the Basmala and then stopping and then reading the first ayah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل أعوذ برب الناس. Okay. This is some practice that inshallah you guys can do on your own. Because we're recording this session, some people may not be comfortable with their voices being recorded or being part of the recording. So inshallah, these slides are available and you can practice all 4 of those options, inshallah. Okay, now, what if that was when we're beginning our recitation from beginning of a surah? But sometimes, for example, if you're reading Surah Al-Baqarah, it's a very long surah, you may not finish the whole thing in one sitting, so you stop in the middle. Now you want to start your recitation again, okay? So there are a few rules that apply here. So saying the Isti'adha in that case is highly recommended. Beginning a recitation with A'udhu Billahi Minash Shaitanir Rajeem. You can say the Basmala, but you do not have to, like you do for the beginning of a surah, except for Surah At-Tawbah. Okay, if you are saying the Basmala, then all 4 of the above options will apply. Okay, everything that we did, it will basically just be treated like you're beginning a surah. If you are not saying the Basmala, then there are 2 options. You are going to join the Isti'adha with the ayah from where one is starting the recitation, or you are stopping at the Isti'adha and then beginning a recitation from the next ayah. So let's say we were beginning from let me think. Okay, so let's say we are beginning from the middle of Surah An-Naba. Inna lil-muttaqina mafaza. So I can say أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم إن للمتقين مفازا, or أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم إن للمتقين مفازا. Okay, now hopefully that's clear. Now there are some exceptions, and this is, I would say, perhaps the most important part of this presentation, because this is related to the meaning. If the ayah begins with the name of Allah, or a word that refers to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or even a pronoun that refers to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we do not join it with the Isti'adha. Okay? Because the Isti'adha ends with ash-shaytan al-rajim, the accursed shaitan. We do not join the ayah that begins with Allah, or the name of Allah, lafdul jalala, or huwa Allahu alladhi, where huwa refers back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We do not join it with the Isti'adha. So you have several options there. One is that you stop after the Isti'adha, or that you say the Basmala. So there are several examples. Surah Al-Baqarah and Ayat al-Kursi begins with Allahu la ilaha illahu. So if you were to begin from there, from the middle of Surah Al-Baqarah and say Allahu la ilaha illahu, you can say A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Allahu la ilaha illahu. Or you can say أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الله لا إله إلا هو. Or for example, in Surah Al-Hashr, you have هو الله الذي لا إله إلا هو. That also would, the same rules would apply. You would not join the Istiadha with the beginning of that ayah. Okay? Now, if the ayah begins with the name of shaitan or a pronoun referring to him, then it is recommended that the Qari not recite the Basmala after the Isti'adha. Okay? So that you just say, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, and then you begin with that ayah. And let's say you do want to say the Basmala, you can say the Basmala, but you do not join it with with the beginning of that ayah, because it is referring directly to shaitan. Okay? And these are two examples of where that happens. Okay. Any questions about this so far? We have completed the portion on the Isti'adha. Okay. Alhamdulillah. All right, now we're going to begin portion on the Basmala. So the Basmala in Tajweed means to say Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Like the Isti'adha, it is mustahab to recite it at the beginning of a surah. Again, it is not required. It is required when you are moving from one surah to another. Why is that? Why is that required? Because each Qari in the 10 qira'at has their own way of joining two surahs. And in the case of Imam Hafs, you have to read the Basmala between the two surahs. If one is beginning the recitation from the middle of a surah, like we had discussed before, then again, it is optional, and it is not recited when ending Surah Al-Anfal and beginning Surah Al-Tawbah. And we're going to go into more detail, inshallah, about that particular joining of those two surahs at a later on in the seminar, inshallah. Okay, is it an ayah of the Quran? Now, unlike the discussion for A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, there's actually a difference of opinion about is it an ayah of the Quran. Also, there's a difference of opinion about whether it is an ayah of Surah Al-Fatiha. So there are, for example, Imam Shafi'i believes, or his opinion is, in the Shafi'i school, the opinion is that Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim is the first ayah of Surah Al-Fatiha. However, in the Hanafi school of thought, the agreed upon opinion is that it is not part of Al-Fatiha. So now, where is there no discussion is when there is an ayah in Surah Al-Naml where Sulaiman alayhi salam has written a letter to the queen of Saba, and in which she's reading it out loud, and she says that and it begins with Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Now there we know that yes, that is there's no difference of opinion that Basmala is a part of the Quran. But is the Basmala part of the Quran? And again, I mentioned that this is an important discussion because there are times when we are not in a state where we can recite the Quran. So then the question is, can we say the Basmala or not? Okay. So that is a difference of opinion amongst fuqaha. And again, as I mentioned before, it is best to follow your school of thought during Salah. Now, in the riwayah of Hafs and Asim, which is the one that we recited, the reciter should recite the Basmala between the surahs. Okay, and we're going to discuss that a little more later. But it is very important that when you're transitioning from one surah to the next, the Basmala must be recited. Okay. All right. Okay, so now let's say we are, the situation is that you are reciting Juz' Amma, and you have finished reciting Surah Al-Falaq, and now you are going to begin Surah Al-Nas, right? So we said when we were doing this for the Isti'adha, we said that there were 4 options. In this case, there are also 4 options, but 3 options are correct and the 4th one is wrong. And the 3 parts that we are dealing with is the last ayah of Surah Al-Falaq, the Basmala, and the first ayah of Surah Al-Nas. Okay, so 3 options are correct and 1 option is incorrect. So, the obvious one is stopping at all 3 of them at the end of the end of the last ayah of Surah Al-Falaq, the end of the Basmala, the end of Surah Al-Nas. The other example is, the other option is joining all 3 of them. And then the other one is that you stop at the end of Surah Al-Falaq, but then you join the Basmala with the first ayah of Surah Al-Nas. The one that's wrong is when you join the last ayah of the surah, so in this case Surah Al-Falaq, with the Basmala, and you stop at the end of the Basmala, and then you begin from Surah Al-Nas. Why is this wrong? This is wrong because it suggests that the Basmala is the last ayah of Surah Al-Falaq, which it's not. So it's important that we do not join those 2 and then stop at the Basmala. If we choose to join the last ayah of Surah Al-Falaq with the Basmala, then we must join the Basmala with the first ayah of Surah Al-Nas as well. Okay, any questions about that, about what is correct or incorrect? We're going to do a practice recitation very soon. Anybody has any questions here? Okay. All right, so I'm going to read this for you, and I know this is a long ayah, but the reason why I chose it is because it has iqlab at the end. So I wanted to show you guys how that is recited when we join an ayah that is ending with tanween, with the ba of Basmala. Okay, so we're going to go through each one of the options. So the first option is join all 3. الذي أطعمهم من جوع وآمنهم من خوف بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم أرأيت الذي يكذب بالدين. And then our next option was stopping at all 3. الذي أطعمهم من جوع وآمنهم من خوف بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم أرأيت الذي يكذب بالدين. And then our next option is to stop at the end of the last ayah of Surah Al-Quraysh and then join the Basmala with the first ayah of Surah Al-Ma'un. الذي أطعمهم من جوع وآمنهم من خوف بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم أرأيت الذي يكذب بالدين. All right, and then the wrong one would be if we joined the last ayah of Surah Al-Quraysh with the Basmala and we stopped at the Basmala and then we recited the first ayah of Surah Al-Ma'un. Any questions so far about what we've covered? We're good? Okay. Alhamdulillah. Okay, now we get to Surah Al-Anfal and Surah Al-Tawbah. All right, so there's a few things that I'm going to have to explain to you here. The first thing that we're going to explain is Mad Adad al-Sukun, because that is the med that actually creates most of these options. If it wasn't for Mad Adad al-Sukun applying, we would only have 6 options. Okay, but because of Mad Adad al-Sukun, we have 14 options. So let us, inshallah, explain what Mad Adad al-Sukun is. Okay, now Mad Adad al-Sukun is if you have, and the word adad means temporary. Okay, Mad Adad al-Sukun. Mad Adad al-Sukun is basically when you are stopping on a letter that has a temporary sukoon and it has a mat tabi'i before it. Okay? So in the case, for example, the word يعملون. Okay? Now, when we stop on this word, we make a temporary sukoon, يعملون. And right before it, there's a mat tabi'i, dhamma, followed by a waw sakina. Or it could be a kasra followed by a ya sakina, or a fatha followed by an alif. Now, in this case, this mad, because of the temporary sukoon on the noon, can be read with 2, 4, or 6 counts. Okay, so it can be ya'malun, ya'malun, ya'malun. Okay, Surah Al-Fatiha is a very good surah to practice this rule. And the only little condition here is consistency, that you have to be consistent in your count. So you cannot, do 2 and 4 and 6, and you have to do 2, 2, 2, or 4, 4, 4, or 6, 6, 6. The only exception to that rule is the last ayah before you stop your recitation. So let's say I only want to read 3 ayahs of Surah Al-Fatiha. Okay, so I can say Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, Ar-Rahmanir Rahim, Maliki Yawmiddin. And that suggests to the listener that I am finishing my recitation here. Okay, but other than that, you must be consistent. A lot of people, what they do is they decide on a particular count that they like. So there are people who just recite always with the 4 at the end. Some always do 2 at the end of an ayah that has mad'ar al-sukun, and that is up to you. Okay, so any questions about what mad'ar al-sukun is? Because it's very important that we understand each and every element of this chart that I'm going to explain to you. If you don't understand any one of those, it'll be very difficult for you to understand how we're getting those 14 options. Is everybody clear on mad'ar al-sukun? Alhamdulillah. Up here. Nothing in the chat? Okay. Alhamdulillah. All right. Okay. That was mad'ar al-sukun. Alhamdulillah. Okay, now we're going to talk about the waqfs. So waqf itself means to stop, but there are methods of stopping, and we're going to go through them, and that will help us to understand how these different options are being created. Okay, so the first method is just waqf. Okay, and waqf means to stop on a word and to take a breath. So when I say Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, Ar-Rahmanir Rahim, Maliki Yawmiddin, this is waqf because I'm breathing in the middle of my stops. Okay. Then there's another one that is sakt, which is a breathless stop. Okay? So we stop, but we do not breathe. And there are a few places in the Quran where this is a required way of stopping or reciting those 2 words. The reason is because if you were to join them, that there would be an idgham between those letters, which could result in a different meaning of that word, okay, or those 2 words. Okay, so for example, we have in Surah Al-Mutaffifin, Kalla bal rana. So I said bal rana. I stopped at bal, but I didn't breathe in the middle. Or in Surah Al-Qiyamah, وَقِيلَ مَنْ رَاقٍ. Again, I stopped, but I didn't breathe. Okay. And there's example in Surah Yasin, in Surah Kahf, and in Surah Al-Haqqa as well. So that's sakt. And in this case, sakt will also be one of our options. The other way of, the other word that you need to know, although it's not a way of stopping, is wasl. Wasl just means to join. Okay? So there is no stopping at all there. And then another form of stopping. And inshallah, when we do the chapter on stopping, we're going to go into a lot more detail on these second two, ishmam and rawm. Okay? Ishmam doesn't have a sound. It is simply the rounding of the lips. Okay? So basically, ishmam applies when you stop on a word with a dhamma or a dhammatain. Okay? So for example, if when you stop on the word ahadun, then it would apply here. And there would be no sound. There would just be the rounding of lips. I'm going to show you a video, inshallah, of that. Okay. Rawm, on the other hand, applies when you stop on a dhamma or dhammatain, and also kasra and kasratain. Okay. Fatha, for fatha, you can only do sukun. You can only put a sukun on it. A rawm is basically giving a small, it's like giving 1/3 of a dhamma or 1/3 of a kasra at the end when you stop. So for example, instead of saying ahadun, we say ahadu, du. Or, ar-Rahman ar-Rahimi. Okay, that would be another example of rawm. So it is 1/3 of haraka. Rawm is considered continuous recitation. So because there is a little bit of that tashkil there, mad arid lil-sukun will not apply because there is no full temporary sukun on the letter, on the last letter of that word. Okay. Any questions about waqf, sakt, ishmam, and rawm? So I'm going to go through it one more time, and please type in a question if you have it. So waqf is stopping, and you take a breath before you begin reciting again. Sakt is a breathless stop. So you stop, but you do not take a breath. Ishmam is when you stop on a word that is ending with a dhamma or a dhammatain, and it is a rounding of your lips at the end, and there is no sound. Okay, rawm is 1/3 of a dhamma and 1/3 of a kasra when you are stopping on dhammatain, or kasra, kasratain. Okay, now an important, an interesting thing about ishmam and rawm is we wonder where this comes from. And so this actually comes from the way that certain tribes used to talk during the time of the Prophet ﷺ. So there were certain tribes that when they ended on a word, they would do this. They would give it that small dhamma or the small kasra. Or with ishmam, if they're ending with a word with dhamma, they would end up rounding their lips. And the interesting thing is that it's because of the grammatical states that the dhamma and the kasra suggest. So dhamma is a alama or an indication of the state of raf', which is the state or the declension that the subject takes in Arabic. Okay, so that's an important. So basically, the end tashkil of a word gives us information about its grammatical role, and which is why they would do this. They would speak like this. Okay. There was a question I saw. I'm trying to see. Can you continue in the next ayah using? Yes, you can. Yes, you can. But you don't make mad arid al-sukun. Okay. So now we're going to go back to our slides here, inshallah. Okay. And I also, I'm going to take a second here just to open up Surah Al-Anfal and Surah Al-Tawbah. Okay. Make this smaller so that on the same page. All right. Now, quick question. Here we have at the end of Surah Al-Anfal and the beginning of Surah Al-Tawbah. That is a very good question, Ramana. So for Ishmam, you would still make the qalqala, but for Rome, you would not. That is an excellent question. Okay. So here we have Inna Allah bi kulli shay'in alim. This is the last ayah of Surah Al-Anfal and the beginning of Surah Al-Tawbah. Bara'atun min Allahi wa rasulihi ila alladhina ahadtum min al-mushrikeen. So do we have Mad al-Sukun at the end of Surah Al-Anfal? Yes, okay, alhamdulillah, we do. So now we know that the options of meds will appear. Okay, and then next question is from the little bit that you just learned about Ishmam in Rome. Will Ishmam apply at the end of the ayah of Surah Al-Anfal? And if yes, then why? And if no, then why not? Yes, but why is there Ishmam? Why does Ishmam apply in this case? Because it is ending with Dhammatain, exactly. Very good. Okay. Now, does Rome apply in this case? Why does Rome apply? Dhamma. Okay, good. And I know that, it's obvious questions because you're probably thinking, hey, it's on the chart. Obviously, it applies. But I still want you to look for those indications and for you to understand that why there is Rome and why there is Ishmael. All right. Okay, so let's go back to our slides. Okay. Okay. So waqf, complete stop, and we have 2, 4, or 6 counts on the word alim. Okay, so it will be recited as Inna Allah bi kulli shay'in alim. براءة من الله ورسوله إلى الذين عاهدتم من المشركين. Or 4 counts. إن الله بكل شيء عليم. براءة من الله ورسوله إلى الذين عاهدتم من المشركين. Or 6 counts. إن الله بكل شيء عليم. براءة من الله ورسوله إلى الذين عاهدتم من المشركين. Okay. Now, that is examples of waqf with 2, 4, or 6. Okay. Now for sect is a breathless stop. So we would basically do the same thing, but instead of breathing, we would not breathe between the last ayah of Surah Al-Anfal and Surah Al-Tawbah, but it would sound basically the same. Now, Ishmam, I'm going to show you what Ishmam looks like. I'm going to have Sheikh Ayman Suwaid do it for you, so you can see it done correctly. Ishmam, and then also we have Ishmam with sect. So Ishmam, basically we're going to stop on the word alim and then round our lips. After you complete them, then you round your lips into the shape of a dhamma, and you would do that with 2, 4, or 6 counts, and then Ishmam also with sect. Okay? So let me explain, show you this. Can you all see the fact that there's a video on here? Can you see the video on the screen? Yes, okay, good, alhamdulillah. Okay, so I'm going to play it, and even if you don't understand the Arabic,
أما الضمة فذكرت لكم الروم تبعيض الحركة، وأما الإشمام فهو كما ذكرت ضم الشفتين عقيبة. عقيبة يعني عقب مباشرة. عقيبة تسكين الحرف كهيئتهما عند النطق بالضمة من غير صوت فلا يدركه المكفوف. مثلا نستعين.
So this is basically how it is done. It's very simple. As you noticed, the way that the Sheikh said it, my slides go. The way that the Sheikh said it is basically very simple. That he said nasta'een, and then he rounded his lips. Nasta'een. So even though while listening, it doesn't sound any different, the person who is in front of you or watching you recite will be able to see the shape of the dhamma. Okay? And this ishmam will also be done ishmam with sakt. Now joining the two ayahs, this is something I will do for you, inshallah. It will be read like this. إن الله بكل شيء عليم براءة من الله ورسوله إلى الذين عاهدتم من المشركين. And there are no options for 4 and 6. Why? Why are there no options? Everybody else has 4 and 6 as well. Why wouldn't wasl have the option of 4 and 6? No? Kind of. So we're making a iqlab, and why are we making a iqlab? Think back to the definition of mad'arid lis-sukun. So basically, in this case, mad'arid lis-sukun is not applying, right? But in in the other situations, meme is also the tanween is also being followed by a ba. But why in this case? Think of the definition of mad'arid lis-sukun. No, the answer is not in iqlab. The answer is in the definition of mad'arid lis-sukun. Because basically the question I'm asking you is, why does mad'arid lis-sukun not apply when we join these two ayahs like it does for everybody else? Why can't I just say Ali, alimun, alimu, alim? Exactly, because there's no temporary sukun. Excellent. So remember, the condition of mad'arid lis-sukun is that there has to be a temporary sukun preceded by a tabi'i. But in this case, there is no temporary sukun because we're continuing, right? So the iqlab is a sign that we are continuing and that we are joining with the ba. Okay? All right. And then the raum. So let me do raum for you as well, so you can see what that sounds like. إن الله بكل شيء عليم براءة من الله ورسوله إلى الذين عاهدتم من المشركين. So again, can someone remind me, why does raum not apply? How come there's no 4 or 6 counts here? Exactly, same reason. No, not because it's hard to do 1/3. That's not the reason. It's hard for us. We have to remember that a lot of these things are hard for us because this is not how we talk, right? But in the case of the tribes at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, it was hard. It would, if we had asked a tribe that does raum naturally to do waqf bil iskan, that would have been hard for them, right? Because that's not what they're used to doing. It's because there is no temporary sukoon. Because when I say alim, that little dhamma means that there is no temporary sukoon on that meme. Okay, this is very, very important because, for example, I made this mistake myself, so that's why I'm letting you guys know. These are the kinds of things that come up on tajweed tests. When you are being tested by, maybe I won't bring it up, but let's say there's another teacher or a sheikh or somebody who's testing you to really see if you've studied tajweed or how well you know your rules. These are the kinds of questions that they'll ask you, or they may ask you the 14 different ways of joining Sutra al-Anfal with Sutra al-Tawbah. And one of the experiences that I've had, is just kind of writing all the options down and going 246, 246, 246, right? And so you have to remember that Mad'ar al-Sukoon is dependent on the fact that there is a temporary sukoon there. So when that temporary sukoon is not there, in the case that when you are joining the two ayat, or in the case of Rawm where you have 1/3 of a dhamma, then Mad'ar al-Sukoon does not apply. Okay, which is why there are 14 options as opposed to 16 different options. Or not 16, 18 different options. Okay? Okay. Any questions about anything that we have covered so far? Okay, we're good? Okay. Alhamdulillah. Well, I guess we're ready to go. So let's just make dua, and then inshallah we will end the session. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم عليه اللهم صل على روح محمد في الأرواح وعلى جسده في الأجساد وعلى قبره في القبور